Hi there, this is John Drew here from Elevated Planet, and today I am here with my friend, Mr. Chris Stiles, who is a human futurist. And he runs his business, which is all about the human futurology side of things. Hi, Chris, how are you doing?
Hello, John. Lovely to see you again and really looking forward to this chat. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Because one of the things I'm really interested in at the moment, and we've been looking at this from an elevated planet perspective, is looking at 2024 and beyond. I'm seeing a lot of evidence, whatever modality you're looking at these days, anybody that's sort of steeped in this world of forward future looking kind of circumstances, I'm hearing a lot of stuff about this is going to be an interesting year where revelations are going to come to light, this, that, and the other, and that is the start of something which changes the world that we live in. So, having evidenced your work over the years, Chris, and I have an awful lot of respect for what you do, and I know that you go back over the years and you kind of look at people like Nikola Tesla who were very obsessed with numbers, right? And the more you look into this, you do understand that everything comes back to numerical sequences. And crazy though that sounds from a mainstream perspective, it's absolutely true. So I have total respect for you and what you do because I know that you have a mind that works differently to most, right? But there's a reason for that. And I think that makes you the talented person that you are, Chris. So, yeah, I mean, y- eh, 2024 and beyond, that's my kind of interest at the moment. How are you seeing things?
Well, John, thank you for those kind words. And yes, I do have a mind that is different in that I have been obviously clinically diagnosed as being autistic. So I do look at the world and make sense of the world through a completely different set of filters. And in my world, the way that I make sense of things is through numbers, patterns, and sequences. And having been trained as a research scientist, obviously, I take an enormous amount of pride in making sure that what I am putting out there in the way of research is very, very thoroughly and rigorously tested. That it's not just mere thumbsucks, where you kind of grasping at straws or one-off wonder type things. And it's very interesting, John, that you talk about 2024 and being a year when a lot of things are going to shift. Now, the word that you use, shift, could actually be replaced by the word manifest. So let me
Right.
explain what I mean by this. Most people are unaware of the cycles that we live in. We wake up each day and the date has changed, and that's it. You look at your watch and oh my word, today is the 7th of January. Then you look at your watch again, the 8th of January, the 9th of January, the 23rd of March, and so it goes on. But because of the way we are conditioned, we just think of it as a date within a year of 365 days. And basically, life just carries on and you go from one year to the next, to the next, to the next. And if you will, we stumble through life completely blind or oblivious to the fact that as dates change, what actually is changing around us is the numerical or mathematical energy that we are operating in. Now, the astonishing thing is that when you open your mind to the fundamental truth that everything around us is happening in cycles of 9, then all of a sudden everything begins to change. Now, firstly, for a person watching this interview for the first time, they would be thinking, what on earth does he mean by a cycle of 9? And if you take a ruler and you look at a ruler and it starts at 0 and it goes through to 9, for example, centimeters, then it goes on to 10, 11. 10 is purely a 1 and a 0. 11 is 2 ones. So after 9, every single number that exists is a construct of the founding numbers, if you will, that was 1 through to 9.
Right.
And all zero serves to be is an amplification factor. So what we are dealing with now in 2024 is a year of manifestation. So how do I know that? Well, let's just do some Rambo maths, John. 2024 is 2024, okay?
Right.
If we just add up those numbers, 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 4, we get 8.
Mm-hmm.
So 2024, therefore, is the 8th year in a cycle of 9.
Right.
2025, if you take those numbers, it adds up to 9. So that's the final year. And then when we go to 2026, 2026 gives you 10, 1 and 0 gives you 1. So this immediately helps people to begin to understand that the cycle that we're in now, in the year 2028, actually began back in 2017 and ends in 2025. And then the next cycle begins in 2026 and goes through to 2034.
Right.
So these are the universal cycles of 9, which are, if you will, the large cycles. Within those, there are much smaller cycles and sub-cycles. And I can, doing the work I do and the way I operate as a human futurist, I can basically take your intelligent mathematical blueprint and I can run codes and sequences which reveal your unique design or construct within these various cycles. But given that we are talking about 2024, what is important to realize is that it is the number 8 year. So when a cycle begins in year 1, which is 2017, the way a cycle works is there are 2 subsets within the cycle. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4. Then, if you will, you get a slight pause. Then you get 5, 6, 7, 8, and then you get number 9, which wraps up the cycle.
Right.
You got it? So if the cycle that we are in began in 2017, then the first manifestation of that cycle would have happened in 2020. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right.
And obviously, what do we know about 2020? Well, 2020 was the year that basically shocked the world on the back of coronavirus, COVID, lockdowns, huge trauma throughout the entire world, economies crashing, unexpected chaos. So the next sub-cycle of this cycle of 9 began in 2021. Right. And so it goes 21, 22, 23, 24. So this year, 2024, if you will, is the alpha or the larger expression of what happened in 2020.
Right. Okay.
First sub-cycle, 2017 to 2020. Second sub-cycle, which is the building upon it, or the amplification, 2021 to 2024. And then in 2025, everything gets wrapped up, if you will, ahead of 2026 when a new cycle starts. Now, this is absolutely how things work. And the more you start to study and explore these cycles, the more these patterns begin to appear. So the really interesting thing, John, is if we think about the cycle that we are in, and if we think about the chaos that has happened in the cycle, just think about the chaos that happened, the global chaos that happened in 2020 around coronavirus, which in turn resulted in tremendous economic chaos across the entire world. And if you will, many first world economies, powerful economies that were always considered to be the leading economies of the world, being brought to their knees.
Yeah.
Then in 2020, so that's event number 1. Then in 2022, we have Russia that invades the Ukraine. This now starts to create supply chain chaos throughout the entire world. It also starts to create an energy crisis.
Mm.
On the back of the energy crisis, the cost of living crisis goes through the roof. Suddenly there's tremendous instability throughout the whole of Europe. All of a sudden, your first world countries like the US, like the UK, and obviously your NATO alliance are having to plow enormous amounts of resources into arming the Ukraine in order to be able to counter the Russian offensive. So there's the first trigger. Now we go into this year, 2024, which, if you will, is the alpha manifestation of 2020. And all you have to do is just sit back, look at the evidence before you, and already what the year is revealing, or what the real year is talking about, is the fact that we can expect much more chaos on a bigger level, on a greater intensity during this year than what we've experienced before. So as much as I would love to be sitting here giving good news, I think what is incredibly important is for people to understand that we are really now heading into what is the teeth of the storm in terms of the cycle of 9. And John, as you well know, through the intelligent mathematical blueprints that I build, I can basically see very critical transitions that take place in a person's life.
Yes.
And I do this through patterns, I do this through numbers, but basically I build the construct of their chart, and every single time it is dead accurate, where you can see, if you will, the seasonality in a person's life. Now, the really interesting thing, John, is that heading into 2024, I can see that there are dramatic shifts that take place in both the life of Putin and the life of Zelenskyy.
Interesting.
The shift that takes place in the life of Zelenskyy actually is an extraordinarily negative shift. So it is suffice to say that this year, I believe we are going to see a tremendous amount of negativity flowing towards Zelenskyy.
Right.
I also think that the Western world has spent an inordinate amount of money and weapons and resources on the Ukraine, to the point where they now are actually starting to ask, hold on a moment, is this worth it? Especially given the fact that the spring offensive in 2023, where Ukraine were meant to drive Russia back, actually failed dismally. And if you really look at the Ukraine-Russian war, it is really a stalemate. In actual fact, if anything, it has advantaged Russia at this stage. Now, just as 2024 sees this shift for Zelenskyy, so 2024 sees a shift within the blueprint of Vladimir Putin as well.
Okay.
So looking at this as these two leaders of these countries, it is not insurmountable to think that the conflict in the Ukraine, as we currently know and understand it, will have changed dramatically by the end of the year. But John, this is where things start to get really interesting. And just as an aside, because I work with numbers and letters, etc., the really interesting thing is that when I take the country Russia and I add up the numbers around Russia, Russia totals 24.
Okay. Okay.
So,
okay. Oh, 24.
24, exactly. And what year are we in? 2024. Okay. So if you, and the interesting thing, John, is that what my research has revealed is that through sequences, everything happens in threes. But if you want to understand how it happens, you actually go backwards, not forwards. So I guess this is the autistic mind, but it's every time a coconut, John. So if Russia totals 24, and we now know that through human futurology techniques, we need to go back 3. What do we, 24, 23, 22? What year did Russia invade Ukraine? 2022. What year are we in? 2024. So this is already asking major questions around the fact that, are we actually going to start to see this thing really fizzle?
Right.
Then the really interesting thing, John, And this is, I think, where it starts to get extraordinarily interesting in terms of this year and what we're going into in terms of 2025, is if we take China and we do the human futurology analytics around China. Now, China totals 26.
Okay.
So if we go back 3, we get 26, 25, 24. So if I were to look at the architecture of what is going on, Russia, if you will, is literally a wounded country. It is a weakening country, but it is an exceptionally dangerous country because, as we well know, there is nothing more dangerous than a wounded animal.
Right.
And I think that's what, but the question that people need to ask is what is happening behind the scenes on a geopolitical and socioeconomic level, strategy-wise, with and through China. And John, I think this is where we're going to see tremendously interesting developments taking place this year. Because as I said, China begins, if you will, 2024 and goes through to 2026. And John, having plotted the intelligent mathematical blueprint of Xi Jinping, who is the leader of China, what is so interesting is that I can see that there are 8 years of his life ending in 2026 that are governed by exactly the same sequence. So what ends in 2026 began 8 years earlier, but through deeper analytics, John, I can see that the greatest risk within those 8 years actually exists next year in 2025, more specifically, John, in the third quarter of 2025, which is the months July, August, and September. So the reason I'm sharing this with you is, as a human futurist, looking into the future, I am most definitely seeing vastly escalated levels of chaos. I think that what Russia began, China is going to pick up on, just on a much, much bigger scale. It's almost, if you will, like Russia went in, made the first really aggressive move to create anarchy and chaos throughout the world. But China is then going to piggyback or capitalize on this. And this could happen through a couple of ways, John. China, for example, could maybe decide to invade Taiwan, especially given the Taiwanese election that is coming up now on the 13th of January. If they don't like the outcome, they could choose to invade Taiwan. Now, all of a sudden, should they do this, you've got wars raging on multiple fronts. You've got a war in the Middle East and around Israel and the Gaza Strip. You've got a war raging in the Ukraine. You could have a war in the South China Sea around Taiwan. So suddenly, resources, if you will, or war machinery spread out all over the place. The next thing we could see, John, is we could see bioweapons, or if you will, pandemics coming to the fore in a much, much greater way.
Yes.
And this is something that I feel very strongly about, because, John, if we just pause for a moment and think about everything working in cycles of 9, if we go back to 2020 and COVID-19, okay, and we count 8 years forward from 2020, we get to the year 2028. Now, remember, John, this is not about thumb sucking, okay, or clutching at straws or conspiracy theory stuff or whatever. This is actually about working with facts. And when you know and understand facts, you begin to ask intelligent questions. That's what I try to do, John. I try to ask intelligent, thought-provoking questions around what I know and understand through patterns. So if this is the case, if there is, for example, a pandemic plan or a weaponization strategy around the use of pandemics in order to create global chaos, then what began in 2020 is actually going to run all the way through to 2028.
Right.
So there's a timeline. Now, I'm not saying that this is the case, but the fact of the matter is, it was very interesting for me a while back to actually come across an article where they spoke about a university actually already having done deep research into pandemic strategy from 2020 to 2028. Now, why would that timeline have just suddenly appeared, 2020 to 2028? Yet, when I apply the intelligence of my human futurology architecture to it, it makes perfect sense. So the thing is, John, the point I'm trying to make is that what we are going into is a time of extreme chaos. I think we're going to see a much greater threat throughout the world around, if I can call it, bioweapons or diseases or viruses, which are of course going to create a tremendous amount of fear.
Yes.
Because there's nothing that one fears more than that which you cannot see.
Yes.
I also think that we are going to see a tremendous power struggle taking place between the East and the West from going into 2025, 2026. And to me, John, what this is doing is it is really, if you will, pitting the East against the West, if you will, China against America, and all of these various entities. If you look at it, China has created this tremendous economic alliance called BRICS, through which is basically looking, and who knows what threats China could pose to America through closed user loop trade and circumventing the need for the petrodollar to be able to pay for oil. So if you look at all of these things, John, in a nutshell, what we are seeing is that everything is building very dramatically towards 2030. Because if the next cycle begins in 2026, then let's just go 26, 27, 28, 29. So 2029, if you will, is the next 2020, or could be the next 2020, unless there is significant change or significant intervention. And this is really, really interesting, John, when one takes a step back and then also begins to apply your mind in terms of the World Economic Forum's Agenda 2030. Because all these timelines are converging. So, you know, John, we could sit here and we could basically say, well, this could happen, that could happen. Guaranteed we're heading into a time of extreme chaos. I mean, just now I can talk to you about how I'm seeing the political landscape in terms of the US and the UK elections. But John, on the back of this, I think what is so important, and this is where the work that you and the work of that Elevated Planet and the work that we at Human Futurology do is so important, is on the back of this onslaught. I believe that we are going to experience as humans where suddenly there will be no normal. Never mind a normal and then what was called the new normal. There will actually just be no normal. And on the back of no normal, we will be experiencing change and fear and anxiety on a level that we've never experienced before. And what does this bring into the fore, John? It brings to the fore the importance of your mind.
Yes.
Of controlling and looking after your mental sovereignty.
Yes.
Because even if there is chaos going on out there, John, let's face it, when 2020 happened and COVID-19 or coronavirus was identified and the governments through the World Health Organization decided to go into lockdowns or whatever, we had to conform, we had to comply, because we are citizens of a country. Now, the thing is, when you have to conform or comply, and this to me is the difference between fighting the system and understanding that there is a system, but then also looking at the system, realizing, right, we are in dark times, possibly the darkest of times. But even though we are in the darkest of times, I am going to ensure that I look after and nurture and take care of my mental sovereignty through understanding that there is beauty out there, there are wonderful things, and that while I am part of this big storyboard through being a citizen in a country, I don't necessarily have to allow my world to be as fear-driven as that of everybody else who's buying into everything lock, stock, and barrel.
Yeah, and I'm really happy you say that, because there's a few things really that I would add to this as well. That, I've always said that chaos is a prerequisite for change, and that change is coming, right? That is something that's been on the cards for thousands of years, and we're just entering into that era now. If you look at from an astrological perspective, and I'm not an astrologer, but nevertheless, I do know that we're exiting the Piscean age, which is an era of control, of materialism, of manipulation, right? And going into what is regarded as the golden age, right? Going into something which is more about community based, and something based on the energies, the high frequency energies of compassion and kindness and love and all that, which is great, right? But you go through a transition phase, because it's not like somebody switches the light switch and say, okay, right, okay, Piscean was yesterday, today is golden age, everybody loves each other, right? No, you go through decades and decades of change, because the fact is that each of these eras lasts for, I think it's something, if I remember rightly, 2,160 years. Okay. So now, putting that to one side, right? Now, I think that when you go into these times of chaos, I agree with you 100%, is that it's a matter of perspective about how you view this. Because if you kind of think, okay, right, we are going through dark times, but we have to go through this period of chaos and change because we're going to the light, we're going to this beautiful new era. There are going to be, I see it two ways that people can look at it. They can buy into the fear agenda, right? And that sinks them lower into the low frequency energies of fear, anger, division, right? Division is a big one, because that is what gets promoted so actively.
Well said, John. Well said.
Right. But at the same time, you can look at it through a different lens and say, well, hang on a second, we go through this. This has been forecast. We've known this for thousands of years. It's been written about in the Bible even, right? Not that I know an awful lot about the Bible, but I know it's in the Bible, in the book of Revelation. I think you look at John chapter 21, 22, or something like that is where it is, if I recall rightly. But it's about the new earth. It's about the new environment. But this is a time of change. Now, I think also, I always when I look at the war situation, whether it's Ukraine, Russia, whether it's Israel, I always think about what is the underlying agenda here? Who is the winner, right? Regardless of who technically wins on the battlefield, who's the winner? The winner is the military-industrial complex, for one, right? This is how they make money, right? This is how they would propagate wars given a chance, because that is how they get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier, their level of control. The governments or whoever is pulling the strings, let's put it that way, because I'm less into believing that our elected officials are entirely sort of responsible for the world we live in, right? The world, I think, almost like it's a strange way of looking at it, but if you think about because one of the things you talked about at the outset was manifesting, right? The world that has been manifested, which is what we have today. The world we have today is kind of if you look at the total energy of this around this planet right now, of the consciousness of everyone, the level of fear versus the level of love, right? If you take all that, that gives us the world we have today. So we have manifested what is going on in the planet right now. So we are all responsible for what we have. Now, I do believe that there is a control agenda. You talk about, COVID and about pandemics and the way that could progress. And we're talking all the way up to 2028, right? And I have heard this from so many different sources. In fact, if you go back to the work of Dolores Cannon, right, going back to pre-2010, she was writing about a pandemic which was to come, which was just kind of like, if you looked at what happened with the history of COVID, she was writing about COVID, but she was also saying that that wasn't the only one. There was more to follow. And it was about the fact that, it was fear driven, it would be division, the governments would exaggerate the level of issue to create the fear and the division. And you saw this, you saw the way that it divided people. You have those who bought into the narrative, who were firmly behind it. And in the UK, we'd all be out there banging our pans together to say thank you to the National Health Service. How ridiculous is that? Now, I understand the fact that you're honoring people who are on the front line, right? But there is a different agenda that sits behind this. And that the pandemic that we've had is not the only one, that there is more coming, which could be bigger and technically worse, because that's the way that the fear agenda works. It's divide and conquer, right? There's a control agenda, I believe, that sits behind this. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about here, Chris, because I know we've talked about this in the past when we've done previous interviews, this control agenda, it means that there are people behind there pulling the strings. And I don't believe it's elected officials, because they change way too often, because this has been going on for decades, hundreds of years, thousands of years, who knows, right? But there is a control agenda that sits out there from people who have the manipulation game is what they're doing, right? Now, I don't mean to be a conspiracy theory person, because I believe that there is a lot of evidence out there for this. I think this is, conspiracy reality rather than conspiracy theory. But our mainstream media feed us this information. The governments feed us this information. So how would we, as a population, say, well, hang on a second, we've been told from day one that this is reality, right? If the mainstream media are telling you and your government's telling you, it's got to be real, it's got to be right. But I think that there is a time coming where people start to realize, or a percentage of the population start to realize, that there is a bigger agenda that is playing behind this. And I know that one of the things that you focused on in the past is that there is an era coming where things are brought into the light, right? How do you feel about that?
Right, John. So I think firstly, let's kick off with the focus being on knowledge and what we know and understand. My dad was a mathematician. He read mathematics and physics at university. So I grew up in a household where we could talk about anything, but he would always say to me, look, you can bring anything to me, but please bring me some form of proof, bring me some form of evidence. If you're going to come to me with what is a harebrained idea or a conspiracy theory, for example, bring me something tangible that would actually cause me to start to think critically about it, as opposed to purely just wipe it or disengage from it because it sounds ridiculous. So, John, on the back of being autistic, on the back of having a father who read mathematics and physics, obviously I grew up in a world where 1 + 1 = 2.0. Not 1.9 recurring or 2.0, 1 recurring, 2.0 dead. Okay. I went off to university. I studied a BSc, honors, masters, went into a PhD thesis. And John, the astonishing thing for me is when I was doing my PhD research, the more I began to dig into something, and obviously it was out in nature because I was working as an applied ecologist, the more I began to understand how little I knew. The more I was trying to connect the dots on a science level, the more I was realizing, Chris, this PhD actually is not going to confer upon you the fact that you are a wise man of the village. In actual fact, it should be conferring upon you humility in terms of how little you really understand about what is going on.
Right.
On the back of that incredibly profound life lesson, I then began a very difficult and a very arduous journey, trying to understand more about myself, trying to understand more about the architecture of my life, why certain events happened, divorces, this, why things began and ended in ways that were completely unexpected. You know, did I actually intention this outcome? No, I didn't. So then you sit and you scratch your head and you think, what on earth is going on? And this curiosity and this desire to try to begin to connect the dots led me to uncovering and discovering and ultimately developing the work that I do, which is to unpack an individual's intelligent mathematical blueprint. Now, John, someone listening to this interview right now may have never heard of this, of the fact that you, I, and they have an intelligent mathematical blueprint.
Right.
In fact, billions of people out there are completely ignorant as to the fact that we have a grand organized design which is decoded or deciphered through the intelligent mathematical blueprint process that I've developed. Now, how do I create this blueprint that is absolutely accurate? And thank you for what you said at the beginning, because it's absolutely accurate.
Yeah, no, I've seen the evidence.
And I know that because having built thousands of charts, having spent well over 10,000 hours of research, and having worked with many top people, I know that it is accurate, because every time I reveal the architecture of the design to a person, they sit there and they absolutely flabbergasted. Now, how do I construct this, John? I construct this around the date of birth and the name.
Yes.
So when I sit down with the CEO of a top company and I unpack his blueprint with and through his name and his date of birth, and I reveal it to him, and he sits there and he's absolutely stunned by the design of his life and how he can see exactly how things have happened according to a plan. All of a sudden, everything that he knows to or thinks to be true around his date of birth and his name disappear out the window.
Yeah.
My parents named me.
Yeah.
My date of birth. Oh yeah, I was just born.
Right.
On that day, random.
Yeah, it's what it feels
like. So people who are the leaders of this world, politicians, business people, when they are brave enough to actually engage in having their intelligent mathematical blueprint deciphered, suddenly everything they know to be true flies right out of the window. Because now they think to themselves, how is it possible that the architecture of my life was laid or is laid through an experiential matrix of numbers, data, sequences, and patterns, and that the two critical elements of this are my name, which I thought was just a random thing provided by my parents, and a date of birth into, oh, well, that's when I popped.
Yes.
So if we are fundamentally ignorant as to what the purpose of our name and date of birth are, John, then what else are we fundamentally ignorant to?
Yes.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Because that's just it snowballs.
Yeah.
We can sit here, and it's like this, but that is literally, it's like standing on a beach with what billions and billions, trillions of grains of sand. And that is it's a landscape that we look at and we think, oh, we understand this. Oh, yes, we really understand. This is a beach. And we have researched this and we understand this beach and we know how it works. And therefore, we are in control of this beach, the ego of humanity.
Right.
Until along comes an autistic individual like myself picks up a grain of sand, one grain of sand on that beach, and turns around and says, right, this represents your name and date of birth. You know, oh yeah, those are just random. Yeah, sure. You know, this and this and this. My parents procreated. Bang. There I was, etc., etc. I was born. I was given a name, and then you suddenly reveal to them that there is nothing random about their name nor their date of birth. Now, if that is one grain of sand on that beach that we are fundamentally ignorant to, then how can we honestly look at that beach and think we understand what is really going on? So, John, the point that I am making is that the first step to wisdom, the first step to transformation, the first step to enlightenment for people out there, the billions of people out there, is to actually take the bold step into the realm of embracing the fact that actually we know and understand nothing.
Right. Yeah, I love what you say.
The moment you get there, then suddenly you've opened up your entire mind. If you are brave enough to open up your mind around the architecture of your date of birth and your name, then you can begin to open your mind to the architecture of your family, your children, your this, your that, and it just goes and goes and goes. Your life, your career, the changes, this, that, the world, the governments, etc. And suddenly you realize that, well, what if we actually don't have the first clue about what is really going on? And John, that is where I am at.
Yeah.
That is where I am at. I am at the point where I realize that I am absolutely fundamentally ignorant to everything that is going on. It is literally, John, I guess it's almost as if I am living or existing or experiencing a life through a state of complete amnesia.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
If there is a part of me that maybe understands what is going on, behind the scenes, that part of me just doesn't actually connect with that anymore, because I am really living and existing in this world in a state of complete amnesia. That is, of course, if you would like to embrace the thinking that the soul is infinite, the soul never dies, and that basically the soul is on this constant journey, and that what if, as I look at you and as I look at me, you are not John and I am not Chris. All we are basically the soul manifested into a human body in order to be able to have a human experience and learn and grow on the back of that.
100%.
And John, you spoke about the tremendous shift that took place as we moved out of the 1900s into the 2000s. Well, let's just take a big step back, John. The 1900s was governed by the number 19.
Yeah.
Now, when you unpack the number 19, what have you basically got? You've got the number 1 on the number line and the number 9 on the number line, the two very, very furthest points. Together they make 10, and together they make 1. 1 plus 9 is 10, 1 plus 0 is 1. 1 is all about the individual, me, the ego, achievement, dominance, the masculine energy, win at all costs. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you look at the world, if you look at the world of business, it has been win at all costs. You have to be number 1. You have to be number 1. What is the narrative that has come out of America? Always. If you go to any personal development or self-growth seminar around, with Americans leading, it's all about winning. Winning in the world of business, winning in the world of life, winning this, being number 1, being the best, being the richest. That is the narrative that Trump brings to the table. That's what makes him so incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
Because he's bringing an archaic narrative to the table when actually we've moved beyond the number 19. And ironically, the number 19, John, when you look at it through the lenses of human futurology research, is all about independence.
Right.
Okay? So if that is the energy that was governing that century, then I, Chris, am independent of you, John, and you, John, are independent of me, Chris. Are you with me? And we shall compete, and we shall see who comes out on top. And there's this alpha dominance energy. John, that is done. It's over. It's finished. So the reason the world is in the state it's in, the reason the world is in the chaos it is in, is because we've moved from 19 to 20.
Yes.
And as I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, what is the number 20? It's a 2 and a 0. And what is the 0? The 0 only serves to be an amplification.
Yes.
And what is the number 2? It's the feminine energy. So, John, when we shifted from the 1990s into the early 2000s, what it was the raw war beginning between the independent, ego-driven, masculine energy and the cooperative, supportive, nurturing, feminine energy. Now, these two energies are at war with each other at the moment.
Yes.
And they are going to be at war with each other for a long time, because the male energy, the 19, which is still around in residual form but getting weaker, wants to dominate. And the 20 energy is saying, hold on a moment, we've actually had enough. It's my turn, and you are going to actually toe the line.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm saying this, John, is because if we look at 2024, and this is another one of the Black Swan events that I'm working on. And when I say a Black Swan event, John, a Black Swan event is one that people just didn't see coming.
Yeah.
And it's actually incredibly unexpected. It shocks the world when it happens. Yet when you look back, it actually makes perfect sense. It makes hindsight is a perfect science. That's what a Black Swan event is. And I believe that we are going to see a Black Swan event through the upcoming US election.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you why I say this, John, is because there is so much fire in the system now, and look, John, as given the nature of the year, given where we're going, we are most definitely looking at a year where on an election level, America is literally going to eat itself alive from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've got the likes of Trump bringing this archaic, warlike narrative. Make America great again. There couldn't be anything more number 19, passe, gone, done, dusted than that. But it still makes him a very, very dangerous force to be reckoned with. Then you've got the other side. And the other side is, hold on a moment, how does America transform? Now, there is a very large line of or school of thought out there that Joe Biden is not going to take the Democrats into the presidential election. Having analyzed Biden's numbers through using my intelligent mathematical blueprint technique, I disagree with this.
Okay.
Ironically, Joe Biden has got really, really good numbers this year. In fact, of all the known politicians who are in the running at this moment today for the US presidency or the US election, he's actually the one with the best set of numbers. Okay. Then you've got, look at Biden. He walks up a set of stairs, he falls down, this. So there's also this narrative around the fact that he's a confused old man who hardly knows what's going on. But the interesting thing, John, is when I look at his blueprint, Biden had a critically important attainment sequence for him on an emotional level starting 2021, the very year that he walked into the White House after beating Trump in the 2020 election. And that goes all the way through to 2025, John. So the thing is, Biden is not done. He's not done. I do not see Joe Biden stepping back this year and not being the Democratic nominee that runs for the president. Now the question comes in, who would be his running mate?
Yes.
And at the moment, the default setting would be Kamala Harris.
Right.
Now, I've analyzed her numbers, and I don't see this happening at all. In fact, her numbers are not positive.
Okay.
Given the fact, John, that we have this incredible war, if you will, this war of attrition on an energy level. I mean, John, here we're not talking about people level. We're not talking about team level. We're not talking about country level. We're talking on a universal level. So this is way, way, way bigger than even America versus Russia. You know, we have this war of attrition that is now taking place on a universal energy level between the 1 and the 2.
Mm.
And what could be the single event that could actually create a massive fissure in favor of the number 2 energy and really sticking it to the number 1 would be for America to have its first female president.
Yes.
Now, on the back of that, and with 2024 being a manifestation year, I have done a lot of research and I've done a lot of analytics, and I've looked at Hillary Clinton and I've looked at many of the others, kind of thinking to myself, I sense that this is the year when there could be a Black Swan event.
Mm.
The one person whose numbers stand out incredibly, especially in 2025, as being a year when literally the numbers are golden in terms of performance, achievement, a pinnacle moment in that individual's life, is, believe it or not, Michelle Obama.
Ah, okay.
And
Okay.
John, I wouldn't be at all surprised. In fact, if the Democrats are incredibly strategic, and look, they obviously will not understand the work that I do, this human futurology research, because at this moment in time, it's not even used in a decision or strategic making framework because it's so new. It's really only, if you will, beginning to knock at the door, in terms of its existence. But if they were really strategic and they had this information, they wouldn't even hesitate.
Mm.
They would do everything possible to ensure that Michelle Obama is Biden's running mate. Because if you partner them, they are unstoppable. They are unbeatable. And then also, it makes for the perfect transition into America's first female president, where, given Joe Biden's themes in 2025, he would then relinquish the reins, having taken the Democrats to victory against the Republicans. And also, on that note, Ron DeSantis' numbers are not great. So anyone thinking that he poses a major threat needs to have a massive rethink.
Okay.
So really, everything at this moment in time is actually advantage Democrats.
Mm.
And bringing in Michelle Obama as his running mate would literally mean that come 2025, having won the election, Biden could call it a day.
Mm-hmm.
And Michelle Obama could step in. And John, the fascinating thing is that her numbers are golden for a prolonged period of time, right through to, I think, about 2034.
Right.
So this could possibly be a double term for her.
Mm.
Now, the other interesting thing is that when I look at Barack Obama's numbers and I unpack his blueprint, I can see that this year, 2024, is an incredibly important year for him in terms of providing support, nurturing, etc., etc. Also, there's a high level of anxiety in his numbers through what is a double 2, which has life path significance. So given the fact that they are such a united and a galvanized couple, I think that there is a very high probability that all of a sudden, Michelle Obama is going to be announced as Biden's running partner, because that would make perfect sense in terms of her and Barack's architecture. And John, that would set a cat amongst the pigeons, because guaranteed then America will get its first female president. And to me, that would be the event whereby the number 2 energy, which is cooperative, nurturing, collaboration, far more engaging. What can we do as a collective? It would really stick it to this number 1 energy. And really, John, the number 1 energy now needs to get out of the system, because it has been responsible for a lot of damage, a lot of war, a lot of heartache, a lot of chaos. And the number 2 energy actually is all about searching for peace.
Mm.
And that is how I think it could potentially happen.
Interesting. Very interesting. And I remember when I first started living out in California back in 2008, it was just at the time of the election that I was out there. And I remember because I used to live on East Colorado Street in Pasadena, and we had an apartment, and outside was the big road kind of thing. And immediately after the election, it was like, it was like a New Orleans festival out there. There were cars going up and down the road for hours on end, peeping the horn, everybody's shouting and joyous celebration and all this. And then he had his 8 years in power, but was failing to deliver on a lot of what he wanted to do, which was not his fault, to be honest, because he was stuck in a system which didn't allow him, to a large extent, to deliver on what he wanted to deliver. And I would have always said as well, as a point of interest, I don't know how true this might be, but the way I always looked at his leadership, he was more of a two than a one, right? That was the way he came across to me. Now, I know it's a
John,
feminine
are
energy.
you actually talking about Barack Obama?
Barack Obama, yeah.
Well, if I can just stop you there, Barack Obama's life path, which may mean nothing to people watching this, but it's a critical number. His life path sequence is 2011-2. So that means that everything about him is geared to try to find the cooperative, peaceful, diplomatic, and beneficial to people type of solution, hence Obamacare. Sorry, John, carry on.
Yeah, no, but that does not surprise me, because what you're saying there is his numbers back up the person that he presented to the world. Because, you saw such a contrast when you went to Trump, right? Or the previous incumbents that had been there, pre Barack Obama, right? So, there it was that one energy was very strong, very egocentric, very division energy, on both sides of that. Yet Barack Obama, whilst he didn't have the mandate to basically deliver what he wanted to deliver, because he was slightly hamstrung on, the way that the American political system is, and he did deliver on certain things, but you could see his collaborative energy, the way that he faced out to the world, was actually something where he had a degree of humility and kindness about him. It wasn't authoritarian. It wasn't division energy. It was pulling people together. Now, I know there's a lot of people, for instance, a lot of Republicans would disagree with this entirely, because they just thought he was a weak leader. He was trying to do the wrong things. And, the division there between Republicans and Democrats is exceedingly strong in America. And people will go through an entire lifetime just supporting one team, not the other, and not even considering the alternative, because whether it was their parents or whatever, they'd pinned the colors to the mast, and then all they ever looked for was whatever evidence was out there to support the decision they'd already made. So the swing voters, as we know, is actually quite a small minority of the electorate. Most people have made their mind up, and you could put a monkey in front of them and say, okay, this is our Republican candidate or our Democrat candidate, and they would vote for the monkey, because that's kind of what they do. But and it's no better in the UK, right? I mean, the UK just has exactly the same kind of structure, if you like. In a way, people are always been Labour, or they've always been Conservative, and it's but the Michelle Obama kind of idea is obviously something that very few people would have considered at this point. But looking at the logic of the way that would play out would be quite encouraging, because I know when we were talking about this before, you were kind of like, you were going back maybe a year and a half ago, we were talking about this, and you were seeing that Trump had the potential to get back in at this stage. What's happened with Trump?
John, such an interesting question. So Trump got in 2016. And there was a very interesting, unique set of numbers that formed a sequence around that year for it. Now, that exact same string of numbers, that sequence that gave him success in 2016, repeats again, interestingly enough, in 2025.
Okay.
So the thing is, if you look at this, you could very easily, make the deduction, well, Trump is going to come through and he's probably going to win again in 2025. The thing is, that sequence is absolutely unique to 2025. And then after 2025, in 2026, there's another very extreme experience that takes place for him. The other thing, John, is this year, 2024, having looked at the architecture of Donald Trump's blueprint, there is a double six that presents in the mathematics that I do for him on a personal level within the emotional sphere of the modeling that I do. This talks to very, very dramatic and troubled relationships. And we see that he's got this double six presenting very powerfully in 2024 on a personal emotional level. What this reveals is that this is a year when he is going to have an enormous amount of chaos on a personal emotional level around relationships, responsibility, matters of the heart, sense of community, etc., etc. So this does not bode well for him at all. Remember, Trump is also born in June.
Okay.
So I am expecting a lot of chaos. You look at Melania Trump, you don't see her anywhere. When he did his previous campaign in 2016, he was surrounded by his family, Ivanka Trump, etc., really helping him get the message out. At this moment, wherever you look, wherever he goes, he's literally just this solo individual,
right,
delivering this message. So I think that Trump, given what his intelligent mathematical blueprint reveals this year, is in a much, much more weakened position campaigning towards the end of 2024 than he was when he was doing it in the lead up to his taking the presidential election in 2016. Then also the way his numbers change, John, indicate high risk. So I think that looking at Trump, yes, at the moment he certainly appears to be the front runner in terms of the Republican nominee. But either way, John, if Trump does ultimately become the man who fronts up the presidential campaign for the Republicans, it's not going to happen for them. It is absolutely not going to happen for him. His numbers, having reviewed them, having analyzed them very carefully, and having looked at them in context in terms of the advancements that I have made research and intelligence-wise since I chatted to you last, there is no way that Trump will win a presidential election this year, should he be the front runner. And also, I don't see a Republican winning this. I truly believe that this is going to be a Democrat victory. And the interesting thing, John, just to come back to the UK, having looked at that landscape there, Keir Starmer, who is obviously Labour's leader, he has a golden set of numbers with critically important attainments aligning for him in 2025, which reveals that 2025 is one of the most important years of his life. Interestingly enough, a number that is crucial to his architecture on a numerical level presents from October, November, and December of this year. And Rishi Sunak has just announced that the general election will take place during the autumn of this year. So we're probably looking at November or thereabouts. So everything is advantage, Sir Keir Starmer. And this again would bring such an interesting shift, because that brings Labour in at a time when the Democrats would come in. And, John, I think what this is doing, we can either all celebrate this, or if you support the other party, you can think that the sky is falling on your head and it's the end of the world. This morning I saw, or I heard Richard Tice, the leader of the Reform Party, talking about Starmer-geddon. But John, one of the things that we need to do is we need to take a step back and we need to actually look at a much bigger picture. Remember what I said, let's forget about team versus individual, team versus team, nation, country, region, east versus west. What we are dealing with right now in the world is the conflict that is taking place between the number one, which is in its death throes, and the number two, which is coming through. And therefore, we are moving into a world which is going to be all about cooperation, collaboration, peace, harmony, working together, looking for a greater equilibrium. And John, this is going to throw the world of business as we know it into a state of complete chaos, because as much as people would love to deny this, the world of business throughout the world is governed by one thing and one thing only, and that is greed.